Rishi Nicolai, thank you very much, mate, for jumping into the studio today. Now, you are another man that, like Vesa Juvonen, just needs to go by one name, and it's just Rishi. So, mate, welcome.
Mate, it's great to be here.
Now, for everybody watching, listening, tell me a little bit about who Rishi is. What is it? Where have you come from, mate? What's your background, and what are you doing now?
So, Daniel, I work for Microsoft. I am one of the Copilot Behavioral Specialists. And really, my day job is to help customers realize the value of generative AI technologies like Microsoft 365 Copilot into their work. I've been in Microsoft about 12 years. And I've had a number of different roles, including change management roles, enabling internal staff. But I've also been leading the M365 worldwide adoption rhythms previously. So, given that Microsoft is a quite a large place, you get an opportunity to do lots of really cool things over the time that you work for Microsoft.
Yeah. Now, you've got a very interesting role as a behavior architect, I guess. It's kind of unique. Now, can you explain a little bit? Now, I notice over your right-hand shoulder, there's a nice little brain there. So I'm going to pick your brain. Pardon the pun. That was terrible, by the way. Can you explain a little bit how you bridge that psychology and technology gap to really, I guess, architect that behavioral type of change?
Yeah. So, Daniel, to be honest, Microsoft has acknowledged that though we are a technology company, and in order to solve people's real challenges, we need to help them change the way they work, right? And position technology as an enabler for them.
Yep.
We also appreciate that sometimes there are changes of process required, and technology is an enabler for process to be then further modified. So, at the core of things, technology helps people do things differently. And so when people need to do things differently, often they need to change their behaviors and change their underlying assumptions of the world around them and of their work environment. So people are complicated, right? And we know that just telling them to do something doesn't mean that they'll just do it. And sometimes they need a bit of convincing. And where business outcomes require people to change the way they work, we need to help them along on that journey. And so my role as a Copilot behavioral specialist, I spend a lot of my time understanding people, understanding their work environments and their work processes, and then look at how technology will be an enabler for them. That brain back there actually came in really handy when I was doing my degree in psychology. So to understand how the different parts of the brain work and actually connect together to create people's personalities, drive the way they think, and how that translates into real work challenges and work behaviors. So, yeah, I've got an awesome job. I help drive change management with our customers around the world. But I really focus on the Australian federal government. Yeah. And I get a lot of satisfaction in helping our public service fundamentally rethink the way they can serve the citizens of our country.
Now, from my understanding, you've managed quite a few large-scale, not Copilot specifically, but change implementations. Given your background, your role, what are some of the I guess the unexpected or challenges that organisations face when they're trying to implement? Let's focus on Copilot. When they're trying to implement Copilot, what are some of the challenges that people are facing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Daniel. And we are seeing that more and more organisations are looking at fundamentally revamping their technology environment. And we saw that once we started to move our infrastructure to the cloud. And that's sparked a major digital revolution within nearly every industry. Some of the areas that I think that organizations should be focusing on is making sure that they have a very clear why for why the business needs to change, right? Or that change needs to land. And then position technology as the enabler for that change. So when technology is seen as the focus or the reason for the change, that doesn't always get enough buy-in.
Mm.
So if we want the business to buy in into the change, we really need to look at the business outcomes that need to be achieved as a result, and then position technology as the enabler for the change.
So,
What,
so where does that? Where do you think that starts? Where does those outcomes? Where does that get driven from?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Daniel, because traditionally IT initiatives are driven by the IT
Mm.
area of the organization. And the CIO is typically the driver of these new ways of doing things through technology. What we're seeing more and more with technologies like Microsoft 365 Copilot is that IT is bringing in the capability, but the majority of the benefits are being received by the business areas.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely see that there needs to be a very strong partnership between the business leaders and the technology leaders within an organization, where they together come up with that business opportunity or the business vision that the generative AI technology is there to drive,
Mm.
and then make sure that they communicate that across the organization, so everybody's on the same page for the importance of the change. And they
Because
also understand.
that's kind of been a bit of a gap, right? There's always, well, traditionally there's kind of always been a bit of a gap between executive level and IT teams. Have you seen that gap shortening?
So we are seeing that organizations that do Copilot implementation successfully,
Yeah.
they definitely have a really good partnership between the business leaders
Mm-hmm.
and IT leaders working together.
Yeah.
And so you're spot on that in previous technology capabilities, that wasn't a strong requirement. But with generative AI capabilities, that's definitely where we're seeing the most success.
Mm.
One of the questions I always like to ask of executives is what percentage of their business benefits are dependent on people changing the way they work.
Mm-hmm.
And if people don't change, what is the impact of that on the expected outcomes, right? And when I had this conversation with, say, the CIO, very often with generative AI capabilities like M365 Copilot, well,
Mm.
the answer is that nearly 100% of the benefits are dependent on people changing the way they work.
Yeah.
And so that is the indication that this has to be really a marriage between IT and the rest of the business to drive those business outcomes.
Mm. So how do you see then? So how do you see? You talk about generative AI, and that's obviously just one part of AI. So how do you see AI really shaping, I guess, the focus of productivity and all of that sort of stuff? We talk about. Especially when we're rolling out Copilot, we tend to have two tracks, right? We've got a technical type of track, making sure we've got your data estate, your information, your security access, all that sort of stuff in place, and then you've got the more user enablement side of things. So, how do you what do you think the importance of the user enablement side of things is compared to the technical readiness side?
So, Daniel, in my view, every technology rollout has those two
Yeah.
focus areas, those two streams. What we see differently in M365 Copilot is the ratio. So, given that it is a SaaS product and it is fundamentally reshaping the way technology decisions are made, the technical track is relatively light on.
Mm.
But the technical enablement required to get Copilot up and running within an organization is relatively straightforward compared to other technologies we have seen in the past.
Yeah.
And so that user enablement side becomes really, really critical for people to actually get business value from the generative AI opportunity. It's also a great way to disrupt existing inefficient processes.
Yeah.
Because while generative AI is great for individual productivity, I think we have an opportunity now to rethink that into individual effectiveness, right?
Mm.
Yes, as individuals, we can be more productive, but how can we be more effective as a whole? And so, what is the role of generative AI in helping us being more effective as individuals? And then we can extend that to say, well, what does the team productivity look like? And how do we turn that into team effectiveness? And so while as individuals, we could be working within 365 Copilot to help us answer questions quicker. And the two components of generative AI compared to traditional AI, that's really fundamental here, is the ability for generative AI to understand context and understanding of the world around us, right? And that's built into the LLM that is then used to serve the responses to the questions. But the other unique thing about generative AI is the ability to reason. And that's something that we haven't had in the traditional AI models previously.
Yeah.
So having these two in place, I think, helps us think about how we'll fundamentally make individuals more effective, teams more effective, communities within the organization more effective, and then look at the organizational foundations and how we make that more effective as a result. One of the cautions that I think I'd add is that we are seeing a lot of bias in the conversations that are in the industry around generative AI. So we often hear media talk about the negative aspects of AI, and Hollywood very much uses AI for dramatic effect in concepts like Skynet and Terminator. So I think people are very much impacted by the availability bias of negative stories around generative AI. And as technology leaders, we need to help change that by presenting the success stories and the real opportunity of doing things better and more effectively.
So how do you change? I mean, when I'm talking to organisations about Copilot as well, it's or rolling it out, a lot of it is to do with a change of mindset as well, right? So being, stopping thinking, how can I do this process a little bit more efficiently? And it kind of needs to become another habit. You need to learn something new, right? So how do you what are some good approaches, or how have you seen, ways in which you can help facilitate, that changing of habit, or getting people to not just go with the flow and start to stop and think about doing it a little bit of a different way?
Yeah. So Daniel, where we have seen organizations drive that behavior change successfully within the organizations, they're using a people first approach.
Yep.
So they're using technology as the enabler, and then using a change management methodology like ProSci. That's one of the most commonly recognized change management methodologies that I've seen customers use to actually take their people through a journey of change. So that's really important. The other really important part is to put people first. So look at a persona-based approach and use a scenario-based approach. And Microsoft has published a Copilot scenario library that is a great starting point for organizations to get ideas of what is it that they can use Microsoft 365 Copilot for within their organizations.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to that, we are about to publish a Copilot scenario framework over the next couple of weeks, which will give the guidance for organizations to come up with custom scenarios that will give them that competitive edge.
See, I agree 100%. I mean, the successes that I've seen and been involved in have had that, initial almost like prioritization type of scenarios. So we'd get in a room, we'd talk about all these different scenarios, write them down, almost like user stories, and then go through that prioritization and really see what those high value scenarios are. And then you touched on success stories earlier, highlighting, even if it's with a pilot group or whatever term you want to use, but really focusing on those high value scenarios that the users have come up with themselves, and then focusing on those and then highlighting those. That seems to be a really good approach to take when you're rolling, well, not just Copilot, but again, you mentioned before, any type of new technology or change in the way of working, really.
Yeah. And Daniel, there's a couple of roles that I feel like are really important in an organization.
Yeah.
So one of them is the sponsor for the change, right? The senior leader that's looking for this change to happen. So we really want them to be active and visible throughout the change.
And
So
who does
very
that need
often,
to? Who does that need to be? Who do you think that needs to be in a company?
so I really do believe that given that generative AI has the opportunity of enabling and empowering every single person within the
Mm,
organization, that the CEO or the head of the organization is an ideal person to lead the change in
yeah.
partnership with all the other business leaders, including the CIO or the chief digital officer.
Mm,
We're seeing that many organizations now have chief AI officers,
yeah.
which is really encouraging, right?
Yeah.
Because now AI becomes a topic of conversation for every business opportunity.
Yeah.
But being very clear about the change being a people change is going to be really helpful.
Yeah.
The other thing I see, the other role that I think is critical is the line manager, the first level managers within the organization. And the reason why they're really important is because they get to see exactly how people are using generative AI
Mm,
to produce business outcomes and customer outcomes. And they usually are the point where you can identify early resistance, and they get to coach and mentor their team towards building good habits and
yeah.
learning from mistakes.
Yeah.
So I think bringing senior business leaders across the organization, as well as all the people managers on the journey to drive the change, is really critical.
Mm. So with all this AI talk, how do you see? Do you see some apprehension about the I guess the loss of human connection or connectivity and that type of thing?
Yep. So Daniel, that's definitely an important conversation within the industry, right? As I said, there is a lot of media attention towards the negative
Mm,
aspects of generative AI, and I feel like sharing positive stories and success stories helps us create a balance.
mm,
And I do genuinely believe that having a balanced conversation is a very positive thing.
mm.
Something that Microsoft has done is that we have wrapped responsible AI principles around our use of generative AI. So
Okay.
there are some very clear principles with regards to what our AI will be able to do and what our AI will not be able to do. So to give you an example, I've worked with a couple of agencies within the federal government that have a need to query some very specific data types for their work.
Hmm.
And working with those data types is against the AI, responsible AI policy that
Okay.
Microsoft has published.
Yeah.
So even though they want us to be able to enable those capabilities, unfortunately, we've had to disappoint them because that's the responsible AI framework that we have in place that Microsoft will not compromise on.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Um, Speaking of success stories, there was a really big report that was well big here in Australia as well. That was published recently. Tell me a bit about I guess that case study, what was involved and what the outcomes were, and I guess where the next steps are there.
Yeah. So, Daniel, we recently had the Digital Transformation Authority in Australia, a federal government agency, produce the result of the world first Copilot for or M365 Copilot scale trial, which was done with the Australian federal government.
Yeah.
So last year in November, our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced that Australia will be the first country that will be trialing the use of generative AI to improve the productivity of government departments at scale. And so we had 70 odd government departments participate in the program from January to June 2024. And the Digital Transformation Agency recently published the findings of the report. Now, what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to go and find those findings so I can actually quote them for you, Daniel. Just give me a second because I hadn't
Yeah,
prepared.
while you're doing that, so when you said a larger scale, that was even outside of government, so larger scale outside in anywhere,
So, largest government
right?
rollout. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
So, just give me a second. This is not something that.
We are recording live, people, so this is non-scripted, as you can see.
You'll have a bit of editing to do there, mate.
All okay.
Right, so you may want to ask that question again.
What did I ask? I asked. Okay, so
The report.
we'll start from the top. So it was the DTA report, right?
Yeah, the DTA report.
Yeah. So you mentioned the importance of successes, or making a big deal of successes. Now the DTA report was recently released and announced. Can you tell me a little bit about? Well, first of all, what that was, what the findings were, and I guess what that's led to, and what the next steps are.
Yeah, 100%, Daniel. So last year in November, our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, announced that the Australian federal government will be the first government in the world to do a scaled rollout of Microsoft 365 to help the public service be even more productive. So as part of that, we had 70 odd government agencies that participated in trialing Microsoft 365 Copilot within their organizations. And what they found is that 86% of all participants wished to continue the use of M365 Copilot. And 93% of them were senior executives that really wished that they would like to continue the use of Copilot well after the trial. 77% of participants were optimistic about M365 Copilot at the end of the trial. And so they saw value from having generative AI assist them in their everyday job. They also found that summarizing and creating first draft of documents the effort was reduced by between 50 and 70%, which is quite significant given the amount of documents that the public service creates all the time.
Yeah.
65% of managers observed an uplift in productivity across their team, which is quite significant, given that only a small percentage of the public servants actually had Copilot. And the report highlighted that all participants saved around an hour a day.
Yeah.
Which, when you look at about 7,500 people were involved in the trial, that's quite a significant amount of time saved per day that can then be reused in delivering better public service, in more efficient use of resources, but not only that, better mental health outcomes for Australian public servants.
Look, I think, that time saving's important, and I think one of the which I'm sure you'd see as well, is the way different people in different roles use Copilot is going to be completely different. So that's why it goes back to another point you made before. It's really, the rollout needs to be role-based, well, in my opinion, really targeting specific people in their roles, because the way that you use Copilot, as opposed to the CEO, to the marketing, to the finance, to the legal, to the IT person, is going to be different, right? So having that approach, that scenario-based approach, really does lead to that. If it's an hour a day, if it's whatever the time saving is, you can. I'm convinced that you can find time saving per role, but it's not a blanket thing. Here's Copilot, go let it summarize your meetings, because, me as a developer or you as a coder or whatever isn't going to use that functionality. They're going to use GitHub Copilot or something like that. That's where they're going to get their benefit.
That's right.
So that's important, right?
Yeah, 100%. The other thing that the report called out, Daniel, was that 1 out of 3 participants actually used Copilot on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Now, that may seem like a small percentage, but putting that in context, they were able to get an hour of time saving per day by only having 1 out of 3 people use Copilot on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So for some people, they depending on the nature of their job, they would need to use Copilot every day.
Yeah.
For others, finding tasks that are repetitive and are low value, and even if they're performed once a week or twice a week, using Copilot for that can provide them significant time savings and saving of effort.
Mm.
But what's really interesting is that if we start to build a culture of continuous improvement, where we are constantly encouraging people to look at the most inefficient work or the most repetitive work and continuously encourage people to look for opportunities to streamline that using generative AI, we're
Yeah.
able to discover new use cases and be even more effective at being able to do our jobs.
Are you still getting people, I guess, a little bit apprehensive about AI taking their job?
So, once again, I feel like there is a strong bias within the media
Mm.
where there is a large portion of the conversation um, around the negative aspects or
Mm.
the negative potential consequences.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Potential. Correct.
yeah. So I mean, what I definitely see is that Copilot is not autopilot.
Mm.
It will not perform actions that eliminates the expertise of an individual. Right? Microsoft 365 Copilot, for example, is the assistant. And the analogy I like to use, Daniel, is that Microsoft 365 Copilot is like an intern that's joined your organization. They're
Hmm.
really keen to impress. They will do exactly as they're told, but they don't quite understand the context of your organization.
Yeah.
So if we can give them the right guidance, they can go and do a whole bunch of work for us.
Mm.
But because we are the expert and they're just the intern, we still get to make the decision. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't take a report that an intern has written and send it to the higher ups without reviewing it and making sure that that is the right content. So
Mm.
um, Copilot is helping me become more effective, but it is still my expertise and my skills that are being put into practice.
Yeah. And I think that's extending even further now with agents and actions as well, right? So being able to quickly, or not, or sometimes quickly, sometimes not, but create these autonomous agents now to also be that intern that actually goes and completes end-to-end tasks for you as well, freeing you up to do other things as well is where we've had probably the last year or so. It's in this Gen AI space, it's been more chat based. So it's been
Yeah.
backwards and forwards conversations, but now we're moving into a space where this autonomous agent space, not just specifically Copilot, but even outside of Copilot, agents are now starting to become at the forefront and almost becoming a hybrid team for yourself. So being able to create an agent to do specific tasks, we can start to think about even now start to think about building almost a hybrid team of these little agents that we can call on to go and do different things at different times. So it's extremely powerful.
Yeah. And Daniel, spot on, right? So we've got this generalist intern, which is Microsoft 365 Copilot.
Yeah.
But with agents, the way I'm envisioning this is we have a whole bunch of specialist interns.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now you have at your peril, or at like you now have access to a team of
Mm.
interns. One of them is a generalist intern, but you have a whole bunch of specialist interns that are all ready to go and get information for you and do the groundwork so you can focus on making the right decision.
Yeah.
And so I think this is an opportunity that we have never had before.
Mm.
And organizations should be very excited about potentially supplementing the expertise of their people with these agents that are prepared to go and do the groundwork for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a personal perspective, how are you using Copilot on a day-to-day basis?
So, Daniel, I use Copilot to navigate through the enormous amounts of information we get flooded with at Microsoft every day.
Mm.
The rate of change of some of our products is quite significant. And so in order for me to keep up with it, I just don't have the time to go and read all the documents and all the SharePoint updates and all the different PowerPoint decks that are produced. So M365 Copilot is my first point. And so I will go to my Copilot intern and I will ask them about the latest updates around a particular product. If I'm in a conversation with a customer and the customer asks me about a product that's just been announced, so you would have heard there's a whole bunch of announcements that just happened at the Ignite conference.
No, there wasn't, was there?
So the first point of information for me is the Microsoft 365 Copilot. And I will go and ask the Copilot technology to get me the answers that I need. The other really exciting thing about Copilot is that unlike search, it doesn't spray you with a collection of results.
Yeah.
It is very specific about answering just the query that you asked. So that way I can get just the information that I need without having to sift through a whole bunch of search results. Now, I also use Copilot in my personal life, Daniel. Yeah. And so I've got a 14-year-old who loves maths and at the moment is fascinated to try and solve the unsolvable maths questions.
Right.
So I spend a lot of my time using Copilot because obviously my maths is not that advanced. Working with him, trying to come up with different ways of solving these challenges, more for fun than anything else. But being able to learn some really advanced mathematics theorems and concepts very quickly is something I really appreciate Copilot helping me with.
Yeah. Now, at the time of this recording, we've got the AI tour happening in Sydney. Now, you're doing a session on an interesting topic that everybody, I guess, not struggles with, but is really interested in, and that is the essentials of a Copilot implementation. So, I mean, what does a successful implementation look like? What have you seen that success be? What does it look like?
So Daniel, in the session on Wednesday for the Microsoft AI Tour in Sydney, I'm delivering a session that is focusing on the essentials. Mm-hmm. And so, as we have talked about during this conversation, implementing Microsoft 365 Copilot is a balance between the technical readiness components that I'll be talking about and the user enablement components. So we'll go through some of the technical prerequisites and the technical, the minimum viable product to get Copilot up and running. And then we'll be spending a fair bit of time around what we have seen from a user enablement perspective around the minimum viable product and some of the key aspects that we would like organizations to think about as they're rolling out Copilot initiatives within their organization. So my session is at 3:00 in a breakout room, and the breakout room is BRK 410, Copilot Implementation Essentials. I would love to see everybody there.
Very good. Now, I guess as we wrap things up, the last topic, from a user enablement side, what do you think an MVP, what does that look like for a company? What, if we're talking about, this minimal viable product to show success, yep. What do you think that looks like?
Yeah. So in my experience, I've seen a lot of organizations lead with training.
Yeah.
Now, training is a really important part. I guess one of the things that I've had the opportunity to study as part of my psychology and change management studies, but also given that I'm a ProSci instructor, is that we've got to take people on a journey of change. Right? We are biologically designed, our brains think about the world in a certain step-by-step way.
Yeah.
So ProSci have published a model called their ADCAR model, which gives guidance on how we take people on that journey of change. And it starts with the awareness for why the change is happening in the first place. It helps with the building desire in the individuals, where we are helping people make the decision to engage with the change because they see value in having M365 Copilot solve challenges in their everyday.
Mm-hmm.
And once they have that intent, then providing training is effective because then they end up paying attention because there is value in that training. Where we haven't done the pre-work of getting them to understand the why and getting them to understand the what's in it for me, very often people will rock up to Copilot training just because they've been told to go.
Yeah.
And many of them may spend their time playing Candy Crush on their phone.
And then you're starting behind the eight ball, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And after having given the training, it's really important for them to go and try what they've learned in the actual workplace.
Yeah.
And this is where the role of managers becomes really important because managers are there to see what their staff are doing and encourage them to keep on using the technology because we need people to change the way they work for the business benefits to be realized. And the last step in the outcome model is reinforcement. So after you build ability as a result of the knowledge, we want to make sure that those behaviors are sustained behaviors. And so reinforcement of good habits by the immediate manager or the team leader, and then the outcomes from the sponsor. So we understand exactly the benefits the organization has result will help people change the way they work and create sustainable behaviors. So in my view, this is a really good approach for organizations to make sure that they're getting value from their Copilot investments. And I see it as a minimum viable product.
Change management's kind of been a bit of a, especially with projects, which I think has changed now. It's kind of been if I'm delivering a project to a customer, change management's always kind of been part of that, but it's has been kind of like I guess an optional extra, and it's always the first thing that gets pushed off the table. But I think, and you'll be seeing this as well, I think it's almost becoming the center of most engagements these days. And you've touched on throughout the conversation the importance of this, and the user enablement in a Copilot implementation is really important. The other thing that you're mentioning there as well is training and change as well. And I think I'd be interested in your take on this. Is training and change management two separate things, or is training part of change management? How do you, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So Daniel, in my view, change management is all about helping people change the way they work.
Yeah.
Right. And training is an essential component of that.
Sure. Yeah.
But without training, people will struggle to know what they need to do differently and how they need to do it. So training is a essential part of change management. And so is communication. So we need to understand, we need to help people understand why they need to do something different, and then how to do it. And so training and comms are the two most visible parts of change management.
Yeah.
However, change management is more than that.
Yeah.
It involves enabling sponsors to be effective sponsors. It enables managers to be effective coaches and effective advocates for their team. It also requires a really strong partnership between a change manager and a project manager, because that technical side of the change and the user enablement side of the change really need to walk hand in hand within the organization. So change management is the overarching term for all these activities that need to be put in place so people can change the way they work successfully and sustainably.
Yeah. So, I mean, training alone, a lot of times you hear it where, we do training, so we do change management, but training alone isn't change management. It's a bigger thing than just training. Yeah.
Yeah. And Daniel, training is a very important aspect of change management. But unfortunately, by itself, it's not enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Mate, fascinating conversation. Now, before we jump off, where's the best place for people to? You publish a lot of really interesting articles and content and information about all of this. Where can people catch you? Where's the best place?
So, Daniel, a lot of my content gets published on the Microsoft adoption site.
Okay.
So if you want a shortcut to that, that's aka.ms/MOCA
Yeah.
for the Modern Collaboration Architecture website. And we also have the Copilot scenario framework being published soon. So that will be available at aka.ms/Copilot scenario framework.
Very good, mate. Appreciate your time and look forward to your session at the AI tour. Well, at the time of this, this is probably the AI tour is probably going to be done and dusted by the time this gets published. But it was an amazing session, so well done. But thanks for your time and insights. Thanks, mate.
And looking forward to catching up with you in a couple of days, Daniel.